In March 2020, at approximately 10:30 p.m., officers from the Carrollton Police Department arrested Haley Moore in connection with the murders of 3 retired police officers. The arrest took place at an abandoned self-service car wash. Moore was wearing torn jeans, a faded Murphy's gas station t-shirt, and blood-stained Dr. Martens boots. Officers found a folding knife with an 11-centimeter blade and an unregistered Glock 19 handgun in her possession. The Glock's magazine had 15 rounds originally, only 3 remained. Moore offered no resistance during the arrest. Detective Samuel Harrison, 52 years old, a veteran with the department since 1990, conducted the initial interrogation. Observing behind the one-way glass were Sergeant Daniel Baker, 28, and District Attorney Michael Saunders. At the start of the interview, Detective Harrison presented Moore with photographs of the victims: Joseph Sanders, Mark Finch, and Roy Blake. Each man had been murdered over the past 6 weeks. Sanders was stabbed multiple times at his auto shop. Finch was shot twice outside a nightclub, and Blake was strangled in his home. When asked if she knew the victims were former police officers, Moore simply answered, "Yes." She declined an attorney, despite being informed of her rights, and stated her intention to provide a full statement. Moore had no criminal record. Born and raised in Carrollton, she had been working at Dolly's Diner since 2018. A preliminary search revealed a folded city map marked with the victims' addresses and a handwritten list of retired officers, including the 3 murdered men. Forensic analysis later confirmed the handwriting as Moore's. During the search of her apartment, officers found a backpack containing disposable gloves, duct tape, a burner phone with no contacts, and another folding knife. No laptop, tablet, or smartphone was located. The apartment was sparsely furnished, containing only basic necessities. The methodical preparation was clear. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses placed Moore near the locations of each murder within critical time frames, though direct evidence tying her to the scenes required further forensic confirmation. Throughout questioning, Moore remained composed and cooperative, answering each question without visible emotion. She admitted knowledge of the victims, but initially refused to explain her motive. When pressed by Harrison, she maintained, "I knew who they were." Publicly, Sanders, Finch, and Blake were considered respected retirees who had served the community for decades. Internally, however, the department was aware of long-standing rumors implicating them in misconduct during their careers. Allegations of evidence tampering, abuse of authority, and suspected involvement in illicit activities that had never led to formal charges. Given the sensitivity of the case, DA Saunders restricted access to the investigation under Operation Reclaim. Only select personnel were permitted to handle the files, and all materials were stored in a secure evidence locker at the main station. Moore's possession of the handwritten lists and surveillance notes demonstrated premeditation. DNA evidence collected from Finch's and Blake's bodies would later confirm Moore's presence at the scenes. Bloodstains found on her clothing and boots matched the victims' DNA profiles, further strengthening the prosecution's case. At the end of her first recorded statement, Moore requested that her confession be entered into the record without edits or omissions. She stated, "It's not about what they did recently. It's about what they got away with for years." After her statement, Moore was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. Judge Harold Mitchell denied bail based on the nature of the crimes and the risk of flight. Moore was transferred to the Carroll Parish Detention Center pending trial. Carrollton is a small town located in northern Louisiana, with a population of approximately 12,000 residents as of 2020. The local economy primarily depends on cotton processing plants, lumber mills, and small-scale agriculture. The town has 1 police department, the Carrollton Police Department, CPD, headquartered at the intersection of Lincoln Street and 3rd Avenue, a 2-story brick building built in the 1970s. The 3 victims linked to Haley Moore's case were all retired officers from CPD. Joseph Sanders, age 62, retired in 2018 after 34 years of service. He owned and operated Sanders Auto Repair, located at the corner of Brooklyn Street and River Road. Witnesses reported that Sanders continued to maintain informal connections with several active duty officers and was known to spend evenings drinking at local bars. Mark Finch, aged 59, retired in 2017. After leaving CPD, he was employed as a night security guard at Red Barrel, a nightclub situated on the outskirts of town near Industrial Lane. Finch had a reputation for aggressive behavior both during his police service and afterward, with multiple citizen complaints filed during his career, though none led to formal disciplinary action. Roy Blake, aged 61, left CPD in 2017 and subsequently founded a small private security firm called B&B Protection, specializing in residential patrols and corporate security contracts. Blake operated his business out of a converted warehouse near North Maple Street. Despite outward appearances of professionalism, Blake's firm had received several informal warnings from municipal officials regarding questionable hiring practices and failure to report certain incidents. Haley Moore, the primary suspect, was a lifelong resident of Carrollton. According to employment records, she began working at Dolly's Diner in June 2018. The diner, located near the southern entrance to town along Highway 17, catered mainly to truck drivers, shift workers, and local residents. Moore worked primarily in the kitchen during night shifts and occasionally covered weekend breakfast hours when staffing was short. Financial records obtained during the investigation showed that Moore earned minimum wage, supplemented by sporadic cash tips. She lived alone in a rented unit on the second floor of a deteriorating two-story wooden house at 47 Orchard Lane, a building known locally for its poor maintenance and frequent tenant turnover. Rental applications indicated no listed emergency contacts, and Moore's medical and social histories contained minimal information. Moore's communications were limited. She owned an older Samsung flip phone with prepaid minutes and no internet capabilities. Phone records revealed minimal outgoing or incoming calls, mostly to the diner's landline and occasionally to a local taxi service. No social media accounts were located under her name or known aliases. Further investigation showed that Moore frequented a small internet cafe located 3 blocks from her apartment. Logan records retrieved from the cafe's owner revealed that she mostly accessed public records databases, obituaries, and historical property ownership records. No evidence of communication with outside conspirators was discovered. Moore's known daily routines were simple and predictable. She walked to work and the library, carried a canvas backpack containing basic personal items, and paid for groceries and other expenses in cash whenever possible. Financial audits of her bank account showed only regular small deposits and minimal withdrawals, with no signs of large or suspicious transactions. Medical records obtained through court order indicated that Moore had no history of psychiatric treatment, substance abuse, or chronic illness. She had visited a local free clinic twice between 2018 and 2020 for minor issues, including a sprained wrist and seasonal allergies. Psychological evaluations conducted after her arrest described her as mentally competent, fully oriented, and able to understand the nature of the charges against her. Although Carrollton had maintained a public image of stability and tradition, internal records from CPD revealed a history of controversies involving excessive force, missing evidence, and unsolved complaints dating back decades. Many of these incidents involved officers who had later retired without facing formal accountability, including Sanders, Finch, and Blake. By 2020, however, most of these cases had been quietly archived or dismissed. Without Haley Moore's actions, it is unlikely that the broader pattern of misconduct involving former CPD officers would have ever resurfaced. During the execution of the search warrant at Haley Moore's residence, investigators discovered several newspaper clippings hidden inside a shoebox located in her bedroom closet. Among the clippings were multiple articles covering the death of Charles "Charlie" Randolph, a known prohibited substances distributor in Carroll Parish, who was killed during a police operation in 2015. Randolph's death had been ruled a justified homicide following a shootout during a narcotics arrest led by a special enforcement team, which included retired officer Mark Finch, one of the victims linked to Moore's case. The discovery of the Randolph articles initially suggested a potential motive. Investigators hypothesized that Moore might have had a personal relationship with Randolph and could have been seeking revenge for his death. To explore this possibility, Detective Harrison questioned Moore directly about Randolph during her second formal interview session. Harrison placed photocopies of Randolph's obituary, police reports, and crime scene photographs on the table in front of Moore. He emphasized Finch's role in the 2015 operation and suggested an emotional connection as the trigger for the recent killings. Throughout the questioning, Moore remained silent, with her hands flat on the table. When directly asked, "Did you love him?" she responded, "I didn't know him." Given the lack of supporting evidence, the theory that Moore's actions were motivated by personal revenge for Randolph's death was officially downgraded in internal case notes. Investigators reclassified the Randolph-related materials found in her apartment as circumstantial and focused their efforts on identifying other, more plausible motivations. The discovery of the children's book indicated a long-term personal attachment to her early life in Carrollton, despite Moore's otherwise transient adult lifestyle. It was one of the few personal items in the apartment that predated her adult years. Investigators noted this as significant, suggesting that Moore maintained a deep, unresolved emotional connection to her early experiences in the town, including events that may have involved the Carrollton Police Department. D.A. Saunders, reviewing the compiled materials, ordered a deeper internal audit of historical CPD records, specifically focusing on the years 1995 to 2005. Preliminary findings indicated that all three victims had been involved, either directly or peripherally, in several controversial cases during that time frame. Although no formal disciplinary actions had been filed against them, multiple incident reports had been sealed or quietly dismissed. The direction of the investigation shifted. Detectives no longer viewed Moore as a vengeful ex-girlfriend or emotionally unstable individual lashing out over a personal loss. Instead, the emerging profile suggested a calculated individual targeting figures connected to past institutional failures. Moore's motive appeared to be rooted not in a specific personal grievance involving Randolph, but rather in a broader effort to expose or retaliate against those she perceived as having escaped justice. Detective Harrison updated the working theory in the case file summary on April 8, 2020, noting, "No evidence supporting a personal or romantic connection between Haley Moore and Charles Randolph. Primary motive reassessed. Retaliation linked to perceived historical injustices involving CPD personnel." At this stage, while much remained to be clarified regarding Moore's full intent and method of operation, investigators understood that the initial hypothesis, a crime of passion connected to Randolph's death, was unsupported by any verifiable facts. The investigation would now pursue deeper historical links between Moore's early life and the retired officers she targeted. The false lead involving Randolph delayed the investigation by approximately 8 days, but ultimately contributed to a more comprehensive understanding of Moore's motivations. After dismissing the theory linking Haley Moore to Charles Randolph, Detective Daniel Baker conducted a detailed background investigation. FBI databases, state archives, and local municipal records confirmed that Haley Moore was born February 3, 1990, in Carrollton, Louisiana. Her father, Jack Edward Moore, was an officer with the Carrollton Police Department. Her mother died shortly after childbirth due to medical complications. Records showed that Haley lived continuously in Carrollton until 2000. On June 17, 2000, Jack Moore was killed during an alleged prohibited substances operation at West Yard Industrial Complex, a series of abandoned warehouses on the western edge of town. The official CPD report stated that Moore died in a shootout with unidentified drug traffickers. Listed witnesses were officers Joseph Sanders, Mark Finch, and Roy Blake. The same officers later murdered by Haley Moore. Detective Baker reviewed the original 2000 case file and noted major irregularities. Crime scene photographs showed little evidence of a firefight. Ballistic reports were inconclusive. Witness statements from Sanders, Finch, and Blake contained inconsistencies, and no suspects outside CPD officers were ever identified. A short interview transcript from June 18, 2000, recorded statements from 10-year-old Haley Moore. During questioning, she repeatedly stated, "They were wearing uniforms. They told him it would be all right." The interview was terminated after 6 minutes due to Haley's extreme emotional distress. Psychologists at the time diagnosed Haley with acute stress disorder. Her testimony was dismissed as unreliable. Child Protective Services placed her into foster care in Franklin Parish. She moved between 3 foster families before aging out of the system at 18. Further internal CPD documents included an unsigned note in the Internal Affairs file indicating inconsistencies in officer statements and a recommendation to close the file immediately to preserve department integrity. No follow-up investigation was conducted. Property records showed that West Yard Industrial Complex had been abandoned since late 1999. There was no evidence of active business or narcotics activity at the location in 2000. DA Michael Saunders, reviewing the findings, ordered Jack Moore's case reclassified from closed to pending review due to material inconsistencies. Investigators concluded that Haley Moore's motive for the 2020 murders stemmed from the death of her father under suspicious circumstances and the subsequent lack of accountability. Her surveillance of Sanders, Finch, and Blake, as documented in her notes, indicated a premeditated plan executed over a 2-year period. A psychological evaluation conducted post-arrest concluded that Moore exhibited no signs of mental illness or impulsivity. Her behavior was consistent with methodical, goal-oriented retaliation. She showed full awareness of the consequences of her actions. In a post-revelation interview, Detective Harrison asked Moore, "Did you plan this because of what happened to your father?" She responded, "They lied. They killed him. Nobody cared. I remembered everything." In April 2020, investigators reviewing the 2000 death of Officer Jack Moore located misfiled video evidence stored in the Carroll Parish Tax Assessor's archives. The footage, recorded by municipal property cameras at West Yard Industrial Complex, captured the events on the evening of March 17, 2000. The video shows Officer Jack Moore entering Warehouse 12 at 7:12 p.m., accompanied by 3 men wearing CPD jackets, later identified as Joseph Sanders, Mark Finch, and Roy Blake. At 7:15 p.m., the 3 officers exited without Moore. Roughly 1 minute later, a flash and gunshot were captured on the audio feed. No emergency calls were placed by the officers, and the first 911 report came from a civilian passerby 2 hours later. Comparison with CPD's original reports revealed discrepancies. Official records falsely stated an immediate call for backup and a firefight with unknown suspects. There was no evidence of a shootout or external involvement. Detectives Harrison and Baker secured a court order to retrieve CPD-issued firearms assigned to Sanders, Finch, and Blake in 2000. Ballistics analysis linked the bullet that killed Jack Moore directly to Mark Finch's service weapon. The match was confirmed with over 99.999% certainty. District Attorney Michael Saunders deemed the findings materially compromising. Internal memorandums from 2000 indicated pressure to close the investigation quickly and conceal internal misconduct. No independent investigations had followed Jack Moore's death. Following the discovery, Harrison confronted Haley Moore during a formal interview, presenting her with images from the footage and ballistic results. After reviewing the evidence, Moore simply stated, "Now you know why they died," offering no further comment. Investigators concluded that Moore's motive for the 2020 murders was grounded in retaliation for her father's death at the hands of corrupt CPD officers. Her actions were deliberate, premeditated, and tied directly to the unresolved 2000 cover-up. Subpoenas were issued to former department leadership. Several ex-officers provided depositions under immunity, revealing that Jack Moore was suspected of preparing to expose a protection racket involving local narcotics operations and corrupt CPD officers. Internal memos described Moore as a liability and a risk to ongoing operations. Though these findings contextualized Haley Moore's actions, they did not absolve her criminal responsibility. Prosecutors maintained charges of first-degree murder, arguing that the legal system, not personal vengeance, should address past injustices. Despite public sympathy for Moore's background, the state refused to reduce the charges. The DA's office insisted that due process, not vigilantism, must govern the pursuit of justice. Defense attorneys, however, filed motions to admit the West Yard footage and ballistics evidence during Moore's trial to support mitigating arguments regarding her motive. By late May 2020, Haley Moore's case had shifted from a straightforward series of homicides to a broader indictment of institutional corruption within the Carrollton Police Department. Her trial would not only determine her fate, but would also expose long-buried failures that had remained hidden for 20 years. During her final interrogation in May 2020, Haley Moore confessed to orchestrating the death of Mark Finch. According to her statement, she lured Finch to the abandoned West Yard Industrial Complex under the pretense of blackmail. Moore contacted Finch anonymously, claiming to possess evidence implicating him in the 2000 death of Jack Moore. She instructed him to meet at Warehouse 12 under the guise of retrieving the material. When Finch arrived, Moore confronted him. Details of the confrontation remain partially undisclosed due to Moore's limited cooperation, but forensic evidence confirmed that Finch was shot twice at close range, with the Glock 19 recovered during Moore's arrest. Ballistics matched the rounds to the weapon in Moore's possession. As part of her confession, Moore provided investigators with a hand-drawn diagram outlining Finch's expected movements based on her surveillance of his security shifts at the Red Barrel nightclub. The diagram detailed alternate routes Finch used to avoid traffic congestion, predicting his arrival times with significant accuracy. This documentation demonstrated premeditation and knowledge of Finch's routines, further strengthening the prosecution's case. Regarding the deaths of Joseph Sanders and Roy Blake, Moore denied direct involvement. Criminal forensic analysis supported her claim. Joseph Sanders died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound in his auto repair shop. Scene reconstruction indicated no evidence of third-party involvement. Toxicology reports revealed Sanders had consumed large quantities of alcohol prior to his death, and his blood alcohol content was measured at 0.24%, well above the legal driving limit. Roy Blake was killed during an altercation with a former associate in his private security business. According to witness testimony and security camera footage retrieved from a nearby property, Blake and the associate engaged in a heated argument. The confrontation escalated, resulting in Blake being fatally shot with a .38 caliber revolver registered to the associate. The shooting was ruled as second-degree murder unrelated directly to Moore's actions. During her signed deposition, Moore stated, "I wanted the truth to come out. They chose their deaths. I only lit the match." Prosecutors recorded this statement verbatim and entered it into the trial evidence file. District Attorney Michael Saunders announced that Haley Moore would face charges for the premeditated murder of Mark Finch, but acknowledged the presence of significant mitigating factors. The prosecution decided not to pursue charges in relation to the deaths of Sanders and Blake, citing lack of direct involvement and sufficient independent causes for their deaths. Following Moore's confession and the release of information regarding CPD's misconduct in the 2000s, public response in Carrollton escalated rapidly. Protests erupted in front of the Carrollton Police Department headquarters. Citizens demanded the reopening of all closed cases from 1995 to 2010 involving allegations of excessive force, corruption, and evidence tampering. Haley Moore was transferred to Carroll Parish Detention Center without the possibility of bail. Judge Harold Mitchell, citing concerns for public safety and Moore's potential influence on ongoing investigations, ordered pretrial detention. A preliminary hearing date was set for August 2020. Media coverage of the case shifted significantly after the revelations. National outlets portrayed Moore's story as a tragic outcome of systemic institutional failures. Editorial columns debated the ethical implications of her actions, with public opinion deeply divided between viewing her as a criminal and as a product of an irreparably flawed justice system. In court filings, Moore's defense attorneys signaled their intention to introduce evidence related to CPD's 2000 cover-up during her trial. The defense strategy aimed to argue for diminished responsibility based on extraordinary circumstances and systemic betrayal by the authorities entrusted with protecting her family. Meanwhile, state prosecutors maintained that personal grievance, no matter how justified, did not permit extrajudicial killings. The trial preparation emphasized that the rule of law required accountability, even in cases involving profound moral outrage.